But we are talking about our Falcons. It's Dukes and Bell at Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We had a great conversation with Dan Horde, play-by-play for the Bengals, kind of laying out what to expect, Mike. And we're going to shift gears here and talk with Tori McElhaney, Falcons.com reporter, and find out what she's thinking about tomorrow's game. Now, 3 games, Mike. My guess is, okay, you don't want to go into the third game having, to play certain guys. You want to get that in now.
Yeah, we'll ask Tori, but I got to figure Ritter plays the first half, and then we go to Taylor Heineke, and then maybe Logan Whiteside plays the entire third game, like he did the first game.
Okay.
And that's where you're whittling down. There'll be some cuts after this week, and then you get down to 53. It is difficult. You've got to have those multiple games. The Jets have scrimmaged with 2 different teams, by the way. That's something which other teams may start to look at, so you get all that work in.
Yeah, Tori, welcome in, by the way. Tori McElhaney, Falcons.com reporter. Appreciate you jumping on with us. We're getting ready for preseason game number 2. I think the anticipation of seeing Ritter, but how long are we going to see him? What are we talking about, Tori? What do you think? How many snaps are we talking about?
Yeah, I think just from talking with Arthur Smith the last couple of days, he kind of made the comment where it was like how the game would evolve would dictate how much we see of Ritter as well as the first team offense. He was like, if they go out there in the first drive and they go 3 and out, well, I'm going to give them another drive. If they go out and they have, an explosive play for a touchdown on the second play of that drive, I'll give them another drive. He made the comment that it was more about the quality of the reps that they received than maybe the quantity. So I think it really will depend on kind of what type of production you're seeing. If they go out on the first drive and put together a double-digit play drive that spans 6 minutes, then perhaps we don't see them again. I think it just all depends.
How are they going to handle Pitts?
Great question. One I'd like to know. I don't know. I mean, just to be completely honest with you, for me, if it's me, I'm not necessarily worried about putting him out there in the second preseason game. I know that he's, been working through team drills and everything like that, and he has the all clear. But I'm not too concerned if we don't see him at all until week 1.
We are talking about the Falcons' second preseason game against the Cincinnati Bengals tomorrow. Coverage right here begins at 5:30, kicks at 7:30. We're talking with Tori McElhaney, who writes for Falcons.com. All right, so let's talk about some of these injuries. I mean, CP, he's done for the preseason, right? What do we know about that? And fill us in on what's the situation. Hennessy's done as well, and that means Bergeron is going to be the starter?
Right, yeah. I mean, I think this is Matthew Bergeron's spot to lose if I'm really looking at it, because it was Matt Hennessy's from kind of go, and then you had Matthew Bergeron working with the twos and kind of getting his feet under him a little bit at the position. But since Matt Hennessy has been off the field, it's been Matthew Bergeron playing between Drew Dahlman and Jake Matthews, and I think that'll continue until it can't anymore. I think he's the best option that they have at left guard. As for your question about CP, yeah, it's a soft tissue injury, and Arthur Smith said this week it'll be a couple of weeks before they even kind of go back and reevaluate him to kind of have a clearer picture before week 1 of the season. I don't think it's something that they're particularly worried about long term, but CP has been around for a minute. I don't think it's all too bad if they want to give him some rest in the preseason and get him ready to go in week 1.
Tori McElhaney with us, guys, from the Falcons website. Everyone says soft tissue. No one just says hamstring. Is it a hamstring?
I don't know. I can't. I work for the team. I can't say one way or the other.
All right.
Fair enough.
Not that I'm going to play the operation game, but we know it's not the funny bone or breadbasket, but it's either the groin or it's hamstring.
I think we can all discern what that means.
Gotcha.
Tori, talk to us about the defense. Expectations going into week 2. I mean, listen, we saw a lot of the backups in week 1 against the Dolphins, but the 2 days of practice were productive down there. There's no doubt. We don't have that benefit against the Bengals. How many of the starters do you expect to play on the defensive side?
Almost all of them. I think it's kind of a similar situation that you're talking about with the offense, that you're going to get to see a lot of these would-be starters. I know I'm pretty excited to see this defensive line with David Onyemata and Grady Jarrett, Bud Dupree, Calais Campbell. I think you will see those guys. How much, I'm not entirely sure. But I expect to see them on Friday night, and I'm really excited about it because this is a defensive front that the Falcons have pumped a lot of money and resources into this offseason, and to finally be able to kind of see them go 100% is pretty exciting, because you can't mimic that type of competitive nature and going 100% in at the line of scrimmage in practice. That's just not something that's going to happen. So the best way you can is through these preseason games. So it'll be the first time that we're finally getting to see some of these guys that we've been talking about for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, we're excited. I think the message, I know we were talking about this at practice. We're just bigger. We're physical. Arthur's talked about it. I think on both sides of the ball, we already talked about the depth. I know we picked up a dude today, former Louisville player, to pick up for Hennessy and, again, fill out the roster. But to me, Tori, this is the most physical, meanest-looking team we've had since the 17 team that was a really good defense.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a really good point, and it was something that I think you even talk to Terry Fontenot or Kyle Smith, the Falcons GM and assistant GM, and they've said on a couple of occasions that this defensive line, and particularly the defensive front and the front seven, that it was a conviction of theirs going into this offseason that they were going to prioritize this defensive line and getting bigger and gaining more depth. And I think that's something that you saw the moves being made. You can go through all the moves and point back to that one thing about getting bigger and that being the goal and the conviction that this front office had. I mean, that's what they went out and did. And now you can actively see that when a guy like Calais Campbell steps on the field.
Yeah, no doubt. We are bigger, I guess, more experienced as well up front. With Michael Walker, Mykal Walker being, let go, he gets picked up by the Bears. What does it mean for the linebacking core? Who steps in and maybe gets more reps there?
Yeah, so, I mean, for training camp purposes and kind of what it's been the last few weeks, I mean, Caden Ellis and Troy Anderson have been your starters, and Michael Walker was kind of playing a more rotational role. But for now that he's no longer on the team, it's guys like Nate Landman, who you saw last Friday against Miami. I believe he had a sack. And then someone else like Tay Davis, who's kind of playing alongside of that backup role along with Nate Landman. Tay Davis was somebody that Arthur Smith actually had a lot of really nice things to say in the game or after the game in Miami. He kind of made the comment that you could feel his presence on the field. So those are kind of your core group at that middle linebacker position.
Yeah, I know that we're going to be physical. And, Carl, we were talking about this the other day as we're talking with Tori McElhaney guys from thefalcons.com. The idea of blitzing and not having to do that as much because you got all the dudes that can get the down lineman can get there. But I kind of envision Caden Ellis kind of being what Rashaan Evans was supposed to be and walking up and he'll be the dude getting all the sacks.
I mean, it's a great I think in theory that makes sense. And you look at the way that he was used with the Saints last year, and obviously Ryan Nielsen was with Caden Ellis with the Saints last year, and kind of how he was that guy that I think you're referring to and how he was used. And, I think when you look at his usage with the Falcons, and granted we haven't seen, that many blitzes drawn up in the preseason so far, but that's something that I don't think they're going to play their cards. Or I don't think they're going to play their cards hardly at all when it comes to blitzing packages and everything in the preseason. But it's definitely something that you would think that they would have in their back pocket come the first week of the season.
Any updates, Tori, on Jeff Okudah and the possibility of him being ready for the start of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last update that we got from Arthur Smith a couple weeks ago was that they're kind of looking at the early weeks of the season in terms of getting him back, hopefully close to 100%, which honestly is really good news considering, we were standing there watching that injury and you hate to see something like that. And I think it could have, just watching it, I think it could have been a lot worse. So the fact that they're kind of pinpointing the first few weeks of the season as getting him back, I think is really good news. Now, is that week 1? I don't know. Could it be 2 or 3? I would kind of lean more towards that week 3 time period.
We love Clark Phillips like everyone else does. How do you envision him as a nickel, as a slot guy? I know Trey is a bigger dude. You think more of him as run support. How do you think the nickel and how they're going to look in some? Obviously, we're in nickel almost, 45, 50, 60% of the time.
Yeah, I do think he's kind of, right now, D. Alford is your starting nickel, and I think he's earned that right, and I think he's played really, really well for the Falcons this offseason. Granted, we're not seeing in a whole lot of live scenarios, but it's interesting because going into this season and even going into like OTAs and mandatory minicamp, I was kind of thinking that the starting nickel spot would be between Mike Hughes and D. Alford, with Mike Hughes maybe having the upper hand. But D. Alford has established himself as the guy, as the starting nickel. And I think Clark Phillips is could do well to play behind him for a little bit and go in as needed. But that's the position that I think when you think about Clark Phillips being that inside slot guy makes sense to me.
I wanted to ask you about Arnold Ebiketie. He showed a spin move while they were down there practicing with the Dolphins. I know he's been trying to work on what we call a signature move, but he looks to be improved. I'm curious to know what your opinions are there.
Yeah, I've talked to Arnold Ebiketie a couple of times this offseason, and something that that we talked about a lot was how he wanted to add more muscle to his frame. He said he wanted to get a little bit bigger. That something that he learned in his rookie year was that the NFL season is quite a bit longer than the college season, and when you're playing to that level week in and week out, you're going to lose muscle mass, you're going to lose weight. And he said he wanted to go into training camp being a little bit bulkier, and he said that he accomplished that goal. So he has all these things that I think he's taken from his first year, and then includes kind of those spin moves and having a true rush move that he really relies on. And I think he's kind of workshopping all of that right now. I think it's why we actually saw him quite a bit more than I originally thought in that first Miami game. And I wasn't expecting to see him in the fourth quarter at all, but he goes out there, and I think it's because they kind of want him working on some of these things in a more live scenario. And I think that's really good for someone like Arnold Ebiketie who has a chance to really take his game to the next level in year two.
You know, Tori, we talked a lot about the last couple of years, you can't just say like the old Smitty, we're going to be tough. You got to have some dudes. And it just seems like we got some dudes. Mac Hollins, I think, has become an instant fan favorite because he's got swagger. You talked about Matthew Bergeron. I know he's still learning this game at this level. Zach Harris is another dude. And boy, he looks the part, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. It's funny because I remember kind of going through the post-draft process, and you're kind of looking at these players and watching them play. And Zach Harrison was someone who I always felt when I was watching his college tape that he was just like right there. It's like one more thing and he gets a sack instead of a quarterback hit, which he led, in college he had, I want to say like 33 quarterback hits, but he didn't have the sack numbers that I think people wanted, but he was still affecting the quarterback. And I think it's one of those things with Zach Harrison that I think his best days are still ahead of him. And just from what I've seen in the preseason and through training camp with him, it's like there are some really intriguing nuts and bolts there with him. He's a big dude. I know he's, even when he's standing beside Calais Campbell, he's at least one guy on this team that kind of you're not just completely dwarfed by Calais Campbell. I think he's listed, Zach Harrison, I think he's listed as 6'6", but he's every bit of that 6'6", and he fills out the frame very nicely. And so I really think he's someone I'm excited to see develop. And I think it's something that maybe what we're talking about with Zach Harrison in year 2, 3, and 4 is a pretty productive player.
Well, great stuff as always, Tori. Appreciate you dropping by. Looking forward to seeing what we learn about this team in preseason game number 2 and who plays and who doesn't. And we'll be watching, and we'll get you back on here soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, you guys.
Cool. Tori McElhaney, Falcons.com reporter.